Thank you all for coming out. My name is Dave Stokes. I'm a community manager for MySQL. That means I come out and evangelize the MySQL product line to all of you. And if you have complaints, feedback, concerns, or anything like that, I take it back to management. Oracle's seen kind of as a big, monolithic, uncaring company, but believe me, my managers agonize over every complaint that we get. So if you do have something, please let me know. You're going to ruin your camera taking pictures of me. This is for the solicitors or lawyers in the audience. A lot of the things that I'm talking about are future products. Oracle's standard mode of operation is you don't talk about a product until it's ready to be shipped to a customer. With MySQL, we have kind of a little background. And some of the things I'm talking about might end up being blue. And in your mind, you're thinking more of a cerulean blue, or I'm thinking more of a sky blue. So take some of the future product statements I am making with a grain of salt. I'm trying to tell you the truth, but you might interpret the truth a little bit different from what I'm meaning. We're going to talk a little bit today on Oracle strategy and the investment in MySQL. We're talking a little bit about what's new in MySQL, a bit on PHP-centric stuff. And I'm very lucky we have Johannes here, who's one of the PHP connector team gurus. We can all line up and bow to him later. He does amazing work. And then we'll talk about some other goodies and go into a Q&A. Now, how many of you have enough staff to do everything you need to do on your current project list? Okay. Oracle would like to help you out. Oracle's in the business of making money. Part of that's through selling services and consultation and everything else. So I'll run through the marketing slides rather quickly. If you are understaffed and you're having problems and you just can't find all your answers on Google, please consider Oracle support. Oracle is putting lots and lots of money into MySQL. Our development team is now bigger than it's ever been. Our directive is to make MySQL a better MySQL. Our division leaders' main objective right now is making PHP's main database in the world MySQL, and we're making it better. Oh, and by the way, the Community Edition is free and will always remain free. It's not going away. In the time since Oracle took over MySQL, we've released more generally available versions of software than ever before. In the past, we always overpromised and underdelivered. Now we're trying to overdeliver and underpromise. So today, if you want to go download immediately after this talk, you can get the database server Community Edition for free. You can get the new version of Cluster 7.2 that was announced last week for free. Workbench, and if you haven't run Workbench, come up after this and I'll demo it to you. It's a wonderful tool for data modeling, administrating servers, monitoring what's going on, and as a general Toad-like query tool. There's also a whole bunch of utilities that work within and without a Workbench, the connectors. We also have MySQL proxy and a whole bunch of lovely documentation and forums. These are some of our customers. And like I mentioned earlier, a lot of you are probably understaffed, overburdened, and you're looking for help. In many cases, MySQL can help. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Enterprise Edition. For the cost of a couple seats of Office Windows, Windows for Office, you can get support for MySQL. It's rather cheap. It does a lot of great things, and we'll talk a little bit later on how that can help you if you need it. Okay, how many of you are running MySQL 5.1? Okay, 5.5? Folks running 5.1, look at the 5.5 folks, they're doing it right. You get a 20% improvement across the board just by installing 5.5. Now, how many of you are running 5.0 or earlier? Ooh, we need to talk. There's easier ways to doing things. If you're used to the MySQL way of doing things, you're used to all these various little storage engines you see down on the next to the bottom level. I'm now running into more and more Oracle shops that find out that they have MySQL for a CMS or a data modeling tool or something else out there, and they're not used to seeing the storage engines. If you're working in a big Oracle shop and you're the lone PHP developer too, and they have all these big Oracle DBAs who are getting the big pay packets, you can now start taking advantage of some of the tools that they have and making your life easier. With 5.5, InnoDB became our default storage engine. It's ACID compliant, does all the things that the big database boys love, and it's very, very fast. How many of you have ever actually bought a product after seeing a graph like this? Marketeers love this stuff. Engineers hate this stuff. But I put these slides, next series of slides, in here to show you relative performance gains that our engineers are seeing with what they're doing. And as you see, things are getting a little bit better, 370% better. And still a little bit better. How many of you use Windows for your default platform for development or production? Okay, there's one of you, okay. There's always one in every crowd. If you get stuck on running Windows for your development platform, we recently switched with 5.5 from using POSIX emulated system calls to Windows native system calls, and suddenly the thing runs 1,500% better. If you need to be up all year long, except for 5 minutes of that year, please look into MySQL Cluster. It now has shared nothing geo-replicated clusters. I was talking to a company on Friday. They have 3 clusters that they're testing. One of the clusters went down and they never even noticed it until one of the admins called up and said, "What does the red button on the front of the servers mean?" Well, it means they're not running. Oh, so everything failed over the way that it was supposed to. Yes. Okay, you folks who are running MySQL, how many of you don't use replication? Okay. Replication is very simple, and it can save your rear end. Basically what it does, it takes a copy of the binary log and performs those same actions that were performed on the master on a slave. It's very easy to set up. If you don't know how to do it, there's lots of documentation online. Contact me. I can help walk you through it. If you need to set it up on Postgres or an Oracle, you're going to take a week doing it and still not get it right. MySQL is very simple here, and it helps. This is an example of how someone's using replication to scale reads and writes. Now, if you do this 100,000 times laterally, you have what Facebook is doing. Hopefully I'm not giving away that secret from Facebook. How many of you have tried 5.6? Hey, good. There's 2 of us in the room. What we're doing, or the engineering team is doing, is allowing you to play with the latest version of MySQL before it gets set into concrete. We're making a whole bunch of different changes to try to figure out ways of making things better, faster, and easier for you. Our optimizer is being totally reworked. For those of you who have rewritten things from Postgres or Oracle or some other database where we had subselects because MySQL just doesn't do subselects very well, those days are going to be over. The performance schema will give you better clues of what's going on at the lower levels of the server so you can tune your queries appropriately. InnoDB is much, much, much better than it was. Years ago, Oracle bought InnoBase, and the world cried, "Oh my God, Oracle's going to kill MySQL." What happened is the engineering team for MySQL and InnoBase sat down and they now work together, and they're going through the code with a fine-tooth comb, and they're pulling out all the stuff that slows things down. Replication, we're making replication more robust. We came up with semi-synchronous replication, which means one of the slaves has at least acknowledged receiving the change before the master goes on its merry way. And we also have not only SQL access to data with InnoDB and Cluster. There's a panel later today with Johannes, myself, and 2 other gentlemen talking about NoSQL versus SQL. And I want to tell you, with this approach, you have the same core data, and you're just looking at it from 2 different angles. You don't need a set of disks for your HBase, a set of disks for your SQL, and another set for your MongoDB. Everything's one set. With the Enterprise Edition, there's some extra features you get. Pluggable authentication through PAM or through Windows. And the APIs out there, you're going to see more documentation on the API, so I'm sure we'll see some things for Kerberos and other things popping up fairly soon. Since we have one Windows gentleman in the room, I'll run through this real quickly. PAM authentication, you can now do. I talked to a lot of Linux and Unix admins who inherited MySQL databases and want to know about authentication. MySQL authentication right now is kind of permissive, and they're always shocked by that because they want to lock things down as tight as they can. This is a tool for them to do that. We also offer thread pooling. This will give you better throughput. The default right now is that you have one connection for the life of your thread. But with the thread pooling is you have multiple threads available for you. Johannes can talk to you about how with the next generation driver that you can actually do a whole bunch of asynchronous queries at the same time. And I'm sure combined with this, you'll get a lot better throughput for your code. This is an example of what you can do with thread pooling to keep things running nice and smoothly. More thread pooling. Okay, how many of you are not being asked by your bosses to look into virtualization? Okay. All of us are being told, hey, we can't afford another server, but we can afford virtual servers. One of the things that Oracle wants to do is provide you a virtual instance that has everything preloaded. All you have to do is put in your configuration changes, and we'll back it. So if something goes wrong, you're not pointing fingers at VMware, Red Hat, and a whole bunch of other vendors. It's all from Oracle. Oracle supporting it. Oracle will take the call in the middle of the night when your boss wants to scream at somebody. Well, we have one gentleman who does Windows. We also do high availability for Windows servers. Until recently, if you're doing backups on MySQL databases, you're really either serializing the data out to a file or you're taking LVM snapshots. Both are good. They're not very flexible. They don't let you do incrementals very easily. You just can't go get that one table that someone deleted. Enterprise Backup is a highly featured tool. It will let you do all that lovely stuff. It will do timestamp backups, fulls, partials, anything you want. And it will also back up to the big tape drive systems that the Oracle DBAs have. So if you have an Oracle DBA with a big Oracle backup system, or I forget the vendor's name right now, the one that does the big tape, big hardware, I can't remember the name. If you have a shop where you're doing lots of big Oracle and do lots of big backups through the STB interface, we can now back up to those. So you can take your backup problems and hand them off to the Oracle administrator. By the way, do we have any Oracle DBAs in here? Okay, I don't have to speak slower then. Enterprise Monitor. This is an amazing tool. If I had a different laptop, I'd be demoing it for you. It watches your instances, and it will send you an email saying, gee, I notice your system is doing this. Have you considered increasing this to get better performance? It gives you online monitoring of what's going on. It will give you alerts. It will make suggestions. If you run into problems, there's a button on there, and it will wrap up your entire environment and send it off to support. So rather than calling back and asking for your my.cnf file and then a copy of other configuration files, it gets everything together, zips it up, and sends it off all at once so the support folks have everything they need to respond to you better. What's really interesting is it has a whole bunch of heuristics programmed into it to come back and tell you what's going on, suggestions you can get for better performance or better security. Right now there's 140 rules, there's a lot more coming. It works really well. And I had a question a couple weeks ago where someone said, gee, at my shop it only showed 20 databases. Well, he didn't realize they only had 20 databases. It runs on will support several hundred databases. Query Analyzer is an interesting tool. It lets you look at the spikes. You drag the mouse, get that little purple box you see on the graph there, and lets you tunnel down to figure out what's going on beneath the covers and see where your problem queries are. So it will let you drill down and find the bad code. I've been told for the Java folks that they actually get the little code segment that says exactly where things are going wrong. So you can go bug the Java developers and have them change their code. PHP 2? Yes. Cool. Replication is a problem for a lot of shops if you are replicating a lot of servers because it's easy for one to fall behind and not notice. It might be a hardware glitch, it might be a networking glitch, it might actually be some data flow glitches. But Enterprise Monitor will keep you apprised of what's going on. And like I mentioned earlier, this will make calls to support for you, let you know when bugs are coming, bug fixes are coming down, and one button push and everything off and your environment goes to the support folks. Are there any folks who use MySQL Workbench in here? Okay. For those of you who don't, it's a lovely little tool. It is designed to let you admin your servers. It will draw relationship diagrams for you, and it's also a query tool. And it's free, and it's wonderful, and I recommend if you don't have it, please get it. Last Tuesday, we announced Cluster 7.2. Big performance announcements. There were a blog last week that we were doing 1 billion queries a minute. Michael Ronstein, is that how you say his name?
I won't try it.
Yeah, I won't try it. Who's one of our chief engineers, was getting 1 billion a minute. And since then, I've heard rumors of even faster work. So if you need very fast reads, you're running some sort of LDAP server, or you're running an aircraft carrier, look into MySQL Cluster. The US Navy looked into how do you keep flight operations running on a carrier when one half of the ship might be on fire or underwater. And they did a lot of tests and came up with MySQL Cluster. And if you have customers that might be able to bomb, strafe, or shoot you, recommend it. Interesting thing, synchronous replication across data centers that are geographically far apart. So if you have Enterprise Edition, which means you've paid money to go out and not using the free version. By the way, all the Enterprise tools work with the free version. Where Oracle is there to help support you. Now, are any of you from big Oracle shops and you're just kind of the token PHP folks? Okay. Big Oracle shops, you run into, you call a meeting of the database staff and you'll have 35 people in there and you'll have 2 DBAs, a data architect and all that. Usually in a PHP shop, if you want to see the DBA, the system administrator, the system architect, and all that, you just have to hunt down one person. But in the big Oracle shops, they have MySQL, much to their amazement, all over the place. And they're asking Oracle to make the big Oracle tools work with MySQL. Things like Audit Vault. So if you're doing credit card processing and your bank wants to know exactly who gets in and who gets out of the server at any one time, we now work with that. We work with the database firewall. And we're working with all these other lovely tools. If you haven't tried Oracle Linux and you're running a lot of data I/O, please take a look at it. It's Red Hat-ish, but they've made a lot of changes to device drivers. Anything that slows down reading or writing from a disk has been thoroughly reworked. And if it works really great for Oracle 11g, it does amazing stuff for MySQL. We have an amazing support staff all over the world. I think our support staff is now, I won't say an order of magnitude, but much, much, much bigger than it's ever been. And the folks on the lines are really, really good. By the way, we're hiring. So my bosses would like to say, if you're having any problems with MySQL, please consider getting an enterprise license, and we'll help you through that. And now on to the fun stuff. How many of you are playing with 5.4 right now for PHP? Okay. The MySQL native driver has been used since what, 5.3.19? 5.3. In the old days, for those of you with gray hair, you remember when you had to build PHP the first time, you had to load Apache, then you had to reload Apache, you had to put in a whole bunch of different fixes. And then you found out you forgot to put in MySQL, you had to load in MySQL and do a whole bunch of that. Those days are gone. There's a lot of nice features with the new driver. A lot of PECL drop-ins for the replication and load balancing and the query-side cache. I'm not really qualified to talk about it. Johannes can tell you all the little lovely things it's doing. It's really an amazing product. What's really great about it is if you're tuning, there's 150 plus core performance statistics. This is about a month old, so there's probably up to what, 400, 500, 600?
And didn't change that much.
Doesn't change that much. The docs are out there on php.net. Ulf, Johannes, and Andre are always blogging out there on planet.mysql.com. MySQL 5.6, I mentioned this earlier, this is our development releases. They're not for production. They're for you to go out and evaluate and try to break. Help us get a better product by breaking it and making it stronger for you. We have a whole bunch of different options out there. InnoDB is going to be more and more important data storage engine for MySQL, and you're going to see a little less emphasis on MyISAM. So if you're a MyISAM fan and you've been doing full text search with it, please try it with InnoDB. It's much better in speed and has a couple extra features in there. One of the things a lot of people are playing with are the memcache access to InnoDB data, which means you skip the parser and part of the optimizer and you go right into the data. So if you're running memcache at all, this will feel like an old shoe that you're putting on. If you're not, you'll be amazed at some of the accesses you can get and some of the speeds. For those of you who worry about eking out every little bit of performance, used to run explain to tell you what was going on. Now you can actually trace what the system's doing, and it dumps into a JSON file. This is for the alpha debugger 1% DBA. If you're one of those people, please let me know, and I'll give you a demo. If you have any questions, please contact me, my colleague, or hit the websites, mysql.com. We have a lot of information out there. We have forums, so for those of you with questions or ways of doing stuff. Blog aggregator at planet.mysql.com. And at the bottom, if you want to try out the enterprise editions of our software, they're out there for free for 30 days. I also want to mention there's no time bomb in there, so if you go 31, 32 days, you're not going to come in the next day and find a smoking hulk where your servers were. There's no time bombs in there. Our sales guys will probably be pestering you, but the software still runs. So if any of this enterprise stuff interests you, please give it a try. Here's some events coming up. For those of you who are going to be over in Paris, on the 21st, we have a developer day. For those of you in Tokyo, we're going to have Open World Tokyo. We're going to be in Las Vegas for those of you who want to go to Collaborate, which is the big independent Oracle users group meeting. And for those of you who can stand having 45,000 people flood San Francisco around you, please come to Open World. We're working on what we're doing there. It's going to be very exciting. 2 years ago, we had a Sunday. Last year, we had 2 tracks on Sunday, and we were part of the regular database track, and we filled up 3 days worth of information. This year, we have requests to do much, much, much more. Now, I rushed through the slides because usually in a group like this, there's lots of questions that people have, and I want to go through them. So if I went through the slides too quickly, let me know. I can get you a copy of the slide deck or discuss things there. But otherwise, this young lady has a microphone, which you'll need her blessing to speak. But yes, sir.
Yeah, we use MySQL at our company. Now, one of the issues that's come up is it right? Am I right to say? Thank you very much. I'm glad I understand how the enterprise edition works, but we are concerned about security updates coming out for MySQL and whether they're going to be made available as they're ready for the community edition. Mm-hmm. I know it's a tough question because there's lots of licensing issues around MySQL, and there always has been.
Yeah. The official Oracle answer to any bug fix is we don't talk about it. It's like a bad version of Fight Club and I'm Brad Pitt. Should make
yeah, because I mean we're thinking about going to MariaDB or something like that.
Yeah. What we do is when we have the fixes, you'll see a notice saying there's a bug fix, and that's about as dramatic as we'll make it.
Will it be made to the enterprise at the same time as the community edition?
Yes. There's no real separate trees for, oh, we'll put it out to the enterprise folks a week early to try to encourage other folks.
That was our worry.
No, as soon as we know there's something wrong and we fix it and we can push it out, it goes out as fast as we can everywhere.
Okay, cool.
So there's no little dark conspiracy to hurt the GPL folks over the folks with the enterprise version.
Thanks, cheers. Yeah, I've got another question. We're deploying MySQL on a bad website we inherited, and it's got lots of big queries in there, so we're struggling with things like IB data files and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Now, at the moment, we've just got one IB data file, which is about 50 gigs, I think. It's massive. Yeah. And I was wondering if we split that up, would we get any performance increases? Is that a question you could answer? Or was it too technical? Sorry.
It more depends on how you're using the database and all that. Usually, yes, but it's like, can I get better gas mileage out of a Ferrari versus a lorry? Well, it depends on how you drive both of them. Usually, yes. Okay. The other thing is start turning on the slow query log and see what queries are popping up in there. Also turn on queries that aren't using indexes. Now, sometimes slow queries aren't bad queries. If you're going through the entire customer database, that's going to take some time. But start noticing what queries are taking longer to run than you expect and start trying to optimize those.
Yeah, we got a whole load of other issues as well, so.
Yeah, well, anything you inherit always comes with problems, so, Just him? Come on.
Yeah, another thing. Workbench is a great product, but it's quite plug-in Ubuntu. I don't know if people use that. But having said that, it's a really good tool. We use it to forward engineer our projects, things like that. It's pretty awesome. It's just a few things. One day you come, the result set suddenly missing, and you're like, oh great, we've worked the next version. Oh, it's fixed.
Yeah. Our support engineers, when they go out on a customer site, the first thing they do is fire up Workbench and go out and download a relationship table of the schemas. So if you inherit a website and you don't know what's going on, fire up Workbench, get the EER map, and see what the relationships are between the various tables. When you do inherit a project or a database and all that, and you don't know where the pieces are, it's very easy to stand on your own feet and wonder why you're not walking forward. You're just standing in place.
Hi. You mentioned earlier about memcache, and is there some change in the new version in how you're actually going, like the interface between MySQL and memcache? Is that like directly going to be used as a storage type, or is that wrong?
Memcache will check itself. Do I have this data? If not, it will go to the storage engine. It will bypass the upper part of the MySQL stack and go right to InnoDB and pull out the data. It also does the same thing for the cluster storage engine. So it's a little faster because it's going past the parser and part of the optimizer and just grabbing the data from there. So if you're a Memcache site, you're really like 5.6.
Any other questions?
Can you tell more about the cluster? What are the main features of it? Is it like comparable to any of the NoSQL databases, like sharding, blah, blah?
It was originally designed to be a high availability, no downtime, runs on commodity hardware, no shutdown time cluster. It does auto sharding, it scales rather well. All the big telecoms use it to track cell phone ID, so as you go from tower to tower zone, it tracks that. It's really fast. Best thing I can do is either show you on the web where the documentation is on it. How does it compare to something like a Hadoop or something like that? Hadoop, you go out, you put out your result request and wait. MySQL Cluster, you don't wait, it's all there.
Just a quick costing question. The normal costings per socket server, how does it work with virtualization? If you have a virtualized server, do you still pay same licensing fee? Or how does that all work?
I'm not sure if the pricing is different over here than it is in the States. Contact your sales rep. Virtualized licensing is kind of a bugbear for them right now because the marketplace is so squishy. No one knows what's doing. And ask them that question. I really couldn't give you a decent answer on that.
Hello? I've got a client that uses, they use MySQL, they use PHP, and they'll check code, developers will check PHP code in, but then they'll also check in standalone MySQL scripts, and then everything gets deployed through to the testing environment. Mm-hmm. And the problem is sometimes if there's a syntax error in the SQL scripts, it will just break the deployment. So is there a tool or one of the tools that's available for checking general syntax and comparing, for example, picking up things like missing column name or a bad column name or table name before you get to the point of actually running it against the databases and then finding the problem because everything breaks at that point? They've tried wrapping things in transactions, but the developers can't be bothered doing it. They just rather write the script and check it in and move on to the next kind of bit of code.
The cheap and quick answer is to use MySQL Workbench, and once the query is working, mouse over it, cut and paste, and drop it into a text file, and then use that in the control system. I know several companies that do that sort of application to prove the queries work correctly.
But then you've got to run the query against the database to make sure it's...
Well, hopefully you have your production database and your test environment, and yeah.
Any further questions? Yes?
Question related to PHP and MySQL. Can you say that is there like a recommended driver which PHP developers should use to access the MySQL database, like a native driver, or PDO MySQL, MySQLi, if there are like advantages, disadvantages?
Well, let me defer to Johannes.
Okay. Interesting question. What's the preferred way? So Dave mentioned the mysqlnd library, which is the base library replacing libmysql basically, specifically for PHP. On top of that, you have the choice between the old MySQL extension, the mysqli, and PDO. The old MySQL module isn't really maintained. We do bug fixing and stuff for that, but we don't add features, and it is missing some features which are present in the mysqli and PDO. And between MySQLi and PDO, it's always a bit the decision what you like more. That's one key point there. In MySQLi, we have a few more features like asynchronous queries, so you can send off a query to the database and then have some polling to see if it's finished or not and do something else in the meantime. That's only possible with MySQLi. PDO, on the other hand, has in some areas a bit nicer API. It has this also is using an emulation of prepared statements, which can have some benefits in some cases. So it's a decision where you have to look a little bit what's better for your project. Then many projects have some abstraction on top of it, like using an ORM, using Doctrine 2 or something like that. Then you don't have to make the choice yourself anymore.
Well, one recommendation I have, a lot of PHP programmers are self-taught and they don't really think as the data is set. So they think, okay, I just want to get one line out of the database. So they're constantly fetching one line of data out of a database, where for much less work, they could have just gone out and got the entire chunk of the database that they need rather than doing it one at a time. So experiment with your systems and your data and see if you can do it all in one fell swoop rather than picking at it.
Maybe stupid question. Is any of them like a bigger chance or risk to get exposed to SQL injection or something?
So the question is whether one of these APIs is safer from the point of view with SQL injection and stuff. Both MySQLi and PDO support prepared statements. So as long as you can rely on prepared statements, you have the separation of the input data from the actual query, which brings the security effects there. You can't always use prepared statements for everything. Sometimes you have to build a query dynamically. For instance, if you don't know your columns while writing the code, but that comes from some user decision or something like that, then you still have to be careful about what you're doing in your application. So prepared statements alone isn't a help for security. It's a cornerstone to build it, and you still always have to think about security. And all of the APIs have escape functions, which help you to bring the remaining part of security in case where prepared statements can't help. So none of those is the better one, even for that.
Yeah. When in doubt, scrub the data. Never trust input from a screen. And that being said, my sister lives in an artist community out in California, and one of her neighbors changed his name to an exclamation point.
Maybe some know little Bobby tables on the XKCD.
Yeah. So scrub as much as you can, but realize there might be a guy out there whose name is exclamation point, and you probably don't want him in your database anyway, but you might have to make exceptions.
Yeah, sorry, I've got another question. It's about MyISM. I just wanted to know what your support was for that going forwards, if you knew. We use it for full-text searching. It's wonderful. So we wanted to keep it.
Well, we now have full-text search with InnoDB. InnoDB is a much more full-featured storage engine. So it's the way Oracle is going to go in the future. So we're going to put more of our resources into there. MyISAM will still be supported, still be developed, but it's like having a family in a two-seater car. You know, just so much you can put in there at any one time. And why do that when you have a wonderful minivan that you can shove the entire family in and get?
You only use full-text searching because you've got tools to do it, you see.
Yeah.
You can search stuff and run really quick. So you just type, wondering if there's any reason why it would be called out. So.
Yeah.
No, okay.
Yeah.
Any further questions? Anyone?
So I had a question about replication and the situation where you're running a query, a rogue query on your master database, which takes too long. It's doing updates, but it is basically causing the system to break. You realize it's going to it's got to be stopped somehow. If you kill it, your replicator dies because obviously it's out of sync because it doesn't know what was actually done on the master. Is there like a proper way of avoiding this type of situation, like using transactions or something? Can you go in and stop a query and roll back from this situation in such a way that your replicator doesn't come out of sync?
Yeah, you can use InnoDB that does have transactions. The other thing is architecture data, so that if you have the data warehouse guy who's going through and trying to figure out how many of our folks actually have 10 toes and doing something equally frivolous on the data, put them out on a slave just for them so that they don't tie up your master, and try to keep your master for fast updates and replications.
But if this is a write that's just very inefficient and it's taking too long, then you have to write it to the master.
Yeah.
So, okay, and if you kill a query and it hasn't committed, then the transaction will roll back.
Yes.
Are there any plans to implement multi-threaded replication, to make more replication slave threads? Because now if you have a long-running update that is replicating, it stops all the replication.
Yeah.
So slave becomes out of sync pretty quickly.
Yeah, with 5.6 you do get multi-threaded replication for slaves. So
I came across a reference the other day to a storage engine type, a black hole storage engine.
Ah, yes, my favorite.
That accepts no input and returns no output. Can you give a bit of insight into where you would use that?
So there are some esoteric use cases for the black hole storage engine, which are usually not of much real use. Black hole storage engine was mostly developed as a test to test the MySQL server and to do tests on the optimizer without having really to run any data, get any data. But it was released as part of the server, and people found you can do some strange things with it. Some people use it as a storage engine on a master server to get the query being logged into the binary log and then having the query replicated over to slaves. So on that master server, you don't have any logs and any load, since it's actually not doing anything. But on the slave, it will then be written into the database. I don't know how much sense it really makes to do this, but that's a use case some people have figured out and see some benefits in it.
For those of you who haven't played with the black hole storage engine, you write data to it, and it says, okay, I got it. And then it dumps it into dev null. And you send more data, and it says, yeah, I got it. And then there's no data out there. You can probably all picture the braces that says, yeah, return 1, get out of here. It's not actually doing any work. It is fun to play with, and if you're into reading the source code, it's a good driver to start with for a storage engine.
Anyone else? Excellent. Well, I'd like to thank these guys for helping us out. And we're straight into the next session.